Notice, this is not a paid advertisement or a solicitation from this cell phone application developer. I'm merely sharing this app because I discovered it on my own and find it useful. I hope after sharing that you might find it useful as well. Greetings, B3 Burner, and what I have for you today is an in-depth review and discussion of Christian Neubauer's GPS Speedometer app for iPhone. You may have already seen me use it before in this previous video, but today I'm actually going to pick it apart and examine specific details of the app, as well as what I think the pros and cons are. Let me again remind you I am not endorsing or being paid to sponsor this product. Unfortunately, this is not available for those using the Android or Google platforms, only for those using iPhones and iPads. I do hope in the future Mr. Neubauer will consider developing this app for those platforms, but in the meantime, those with Android phones will have to look for GPS-styled apps elsewhere. To preview, think of this as a GPS heads-up display, or HUD, HUD for your iPhone. You can video record your journey and play it back later. It is useful for any vehicle that moves: bicycles, boats, cars, airplanes, wind sails, surfboards, skis, almost anything you can think of. I'd advise that it's something you record as you do it, but watch later, and not to be distracted looking at the screen while moving. I don't necessarily advise it for walking, as those speeds do not trigger GPS in a way that shows appreciable change in a short period of time. The phone doesn't actually hit real satellites, so the S in GPS is a bit of a misnomer, but instead the phone pings off of cell towers to triangulate your position in real time as you move. Through this process, the app can determine your location, altitude, speed, direction of movement, miles traveled, and display a map of your location if you want. Internally, using the geosynchronous device inside your phone, that is, without hitting cell towers, the app can measure elapsed time, current date and time, camera direction, bank and pitch angle, and G-force movements, all without using your LTE data while on the road. The good news with that, the internal part can be done without using your LTE data. However, the bad news is if you want to use the meat and potatoes of the app, speed, location, altitude, direction, and distance, you're going to have to spend your data. Now, if you have an unlimited plan, then no problem there, but most people don't, so I'd advise using this in short increments of under 15 minutes if you're concerned about data use. Also, the app can take up appreciable amounts of disk space when you shoot video with it, so make sure music, pictures, or other apps aren't taking up too much room in your overall phone capacity. With the intro out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so let's get a bit more into this now. The first thing you want to do is open the App Store, and in the search field type TS Camera. Hit enter, and the middle app shown here should appear. Timestamp camcord ... show speedometer time I ... The orange color is an icon in the upper left-hand corner of a bicyclist, a windsurfer, a skier, and a motorcycle helmet. Lets you know you've reached the right app. Note the appearance of the images, the gauges, and digital displays. Just a preview of what you'll be getting into. Note the developer shows these video stills being shot in portrait or vertical mode. Personally, I recommend landscape mode, as greater field of view left and right, to me, is more important than seeing too much of the sky in ground transportation videos. But again, that's just me. Once going into the app description one level further, you can see that it includes in-app purchases, as well as an option to go pro below. Going pro removes any ads, the watermarks in the lower left-hand corner, which you'll see later, and allows you to shoot video for longer than just 3 minutes at a time. You can also check out the quick facts. It has a rating of 4.2 stars. It's for ages 4 and up, though I have a hard time picturing a 4-year-old concerned about speed and location while he's driving his tricycle, but I digress. It's in the category of photo and video, and again, the developer is Mr. Christian Neubauer. This is version 2.12, and you can also read what items were taken care of in the latest update. This next image is a continuation of the last one, just with the center row slid over to the right to provide more information about the app. It can support English plus 8 other languages, and it takes up 37.4 megabytes of space on an iPhone. It's very important. Make sure your music, pictures, video, and other apps don't take up too much space against your phone's total capacity. Remember that besides the base 37 megabytes that the app itself will take up, videos you record will only take up more, so be conscious of that if you plan to record lengthy riding or driving videos. Here you can see the star ratings from 1 to 5, the average score being 4.2, and one person's suggestion for improvement below. This next image is just another summary of the facts stated earlier. The only new ones to add here are that it works on this current iPhone I'm using, which is an iPhone 11. At this point, I don't believe it will work on anything older than a 6, but I could be wrong. It's copyright 2019 by IBM Software, so this is current up to the update a year to 2 years ago. This app also supports family sharing, up to 6 family members. Christian Neubauer has other apps he's created. If you're interested in any of these below, you can check them out for yourself. Okay, so with the app description and the App Store out of the way, we can now move on to my screenshots with a more detailed description of each function and how I use the app. To start with, sampling the door in my office as a makeshift background, you can see my relatively simple layout of gauges and data around the perimeter. Clockwise from the upper left-hand corner, they are course, compass, location and latitude, longitude, speedometer, altimeter, elapsed distance, date and time. You can also see the 5 function buttons with icons down the right-hand border. I'll go over each one individually and what they do. Bear in mind that when you hit record and you're actually recording a video, these disappear and all you see are the heads-up displays that you just mentioned. The first one up top of the function icons in the shape of a compass needle allows you to adjust the size and position of the gauge or data set, as well as delete it from the screen if you so choose. The plus sign icon allows you to add more data sets, and this is the one we will be spending the most time with. The triangle is the start, stop, record button and doesn't require any further explanation. The gears icon allows you to change settings within the app, which I'll explain in greater detail later. And the question mark icon offers a diagram map of the features and what the buttons do. So let's start with the first one, the needle icon. Here, you can see the size and position editors. With your finger, you can drag the items on the screen from the director icons to perform the desired function. The black boxes, like this one over here, with the arrow pointing down and to the right with the dotted box around it, controls size, and you pull it diagonally and down. Some are height width proportion fixed, while others allow you to drag either up or across independently. The 4 arrows pointing up, down, left, and right are the position editor, and they allow you to choose where on the screen you want to place the item. The X in the black circle is the delete function and removes the current data set or gauge from the screen. The next button down is the plus button, and we're going to be spending the majority of our time here since this is where we add instruments, and trust me, there are going to be quite a few to go through. We start off with the one all the way on the top, the map graphic. This displays your current location on a Google-style map. I personally believe its use to be somewhat limited, as in order to make it big enough to see clearly, you have to pretty much block the whole video screen. thus defeating the whole purpose of shooting a video in the first place. And if you make it small enough to be out of the way of the video, it's really too small to discern location from it, not one that I personally use. Remember that in all of these, you have to push the word save down here in the lower right hand corner for the data set to be added to the screen. Next is the speed graphic. This will display your speed with a digital number in the center of the gauge and a relative needle position around the perimeter. Now this doesn't show the digital number in the menu sample, but the gray center of the gauge will have it when added to the screen, as I have in the upper right corner of my screenshot. Note it reads 0 because the camera is standing still and not going anywhere. The hash marks aren't labeled, these individual dashes going around the speedometer, but you can set the max speed for the final hash mark in the lower right hand corner of the gauge so the needle will place itself accordingly. For example, straight up in the 12 o'clock position will always be exactly half the maximum speed of the gauge, not too unlike real speedometers. And if you press the wrench icon in the lower left-hand corner of the speedometer gauge after hitting the compass needle icon in the main menu, this is where you set the maximum speed, or what I call throw range, of the speedometer graphic. You can see that the default is 100, but you can press the plus or minus keys to bring it up or down in increments of 10 miles an hour or 10 kilometers an hour, depending on which one you're using. Once you've set it where you want it, hit the OK button and you're all set. Okay, so to show you the differences in max speeds and needle positionings, I took an exaggerated screenshot of 4 speedometers displaying the same speed simultaneously. Not normally something I would do, but it's to show the difference between max speeds and needle throw ranges. I'm driving 50 miles an hour and all the digital indicators in the center of the gauge display are 50, so no doubt all the gauges are in agreement. However, the needles are all pointing in different directions depending upon what the max speeds are for each gauge. The first one, all the way to the left, is over to the right of center just a little bit and has a max speed of 80. The second one from the left is pointing straight up, so 50 is half the gauge throw, meaning that one has a maximum speed of 100 miles an hour. The third from the left is 2 hash marks to the left of center, quite a bit over. Its max is 140. And the one all the way to the right is to the left of center, but not quite as far as the previous one. Its max speed is 120. So what's the point of this? Well, higher max values equal less sensitivity and less graphic needle movement. If you were drag racing, you might want a high max with low needle movement. But if you were riding a bicycle under 20 miles an hour, you'd hardly see the needle move at all with a max speed of 140. Therefore, you have the option for setting max speed as low as 20 so that 10 will move the needle halfway, a much more sensitive needle for lower speed applications. Conversely, it wouldn't make sense to have a speedometer with a max of 20 while driving a car on the freeway, as the needle would have to make 3 full revolutions on the gauge to get 60. Hardly makes any sense at all. The next data set is simply a digital readout of speed in a box. Much simpler than dealing with gauges and needle throw distances. This shows kilometers per hour, but it can also be set to either miles per hour or knots. More on that later. The next gauge is a graphical heading compass showing north, south, east, west around the compass, as well as heading in degrees 0 to 359. It doesn't show it in the menu sample, but the gray center of the gauge will show it when added to the screen, as I have in the upper left of my screenshot displaying the 287. It's important to note here that the triangle arrow, this one over here, above the N for north always points north as a reference and does not move around the compass to reflect current direction. Rather, the whole gauge rotates, and it's whatever direction is facing up in the 12 o'clock position that reflects the indicated direction. So if we use this compass as an example, north is over here, but the arrow has nothing to do with it. This direction is slightly north or to the right of west, as indicated by the fact that west is slightly off to the left, and straight up is our true direction. Heading is the direction the cell phone camera is facing in magnetic heading as interpreted by the iPhone's internal sensor. The slightest rotation of the camera will display each change of degree in 1 degree increments very rapidly. Unfortunately, however, for all that precision, the heading is not all too accurate. Not only will there always be a difference between true and magnetic heading, but if you're using it in a car, the error is further amplified by the metal around the car. I've noted an error as high as 90 degrees. Totally unacceptable. We'll get to the more accurate choice in a bit. The next display is heading without the graphic. It just simply shows the number of degrees in a box. A much simpler representation, but unless you have memorized what degrees correspond to north, south, east, and west, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest, it's probably going to be of little use to you. I would hazard to guess the gauge with the cardinal direction labels on them will be much more familiar and usable to most people. The next gauge display is course graphic. Once again, it's a gauge that shows north, south, east, and west on the outside of the gauge with digital degrees 0 through 359 in the center. However, there is a huge distinction between course and heading. While heading is the direction the camera is facing, course is the direction the vehicle is moving. Because movement is based on location and changes in latitude and longitude is measured in lines of true north-south and true east-west, respectively, the reading in the course gauge is true and extremely accurate. Now, when making a turn quickly, the compass will not rotate as quickly and precisely as the heading compass because it takes time to register that the car has made a turn over said distance, but I'll take accuracy over precision anytime. This is a working example of the difference in how the course compass and the heading compass handle a left-hand turn. I need to get to 30 seconds on this. Let's see if I can do it. No. Okay, so I'm coming up to this stop sign, and I'd like you to note that this is the course compass. It's going to jitter its way on its turn and not be smooth. This one's going to be nice and smooth. This is the heading compass. Note we really are facing west. This one's the accurate one. This one says we're almost facing north. It's almost 90 degrees off. So I'm going to start the video and watch each gauge and compare them. Top one, 236, 180. The top one, course, is rougher and skips a lot of numbers in its rotation until it centers itself. Back it up a bit. Whereas this one went through all the numbers and showed a smoother rotation. Too bad the bottom one is not as accurate as the top one. If it's a choice between precision and accuracy, I'll take accuracy. I'll take the accuracy of the above gauge any day of the week. And like heading, course also has an option to simply display digital heading in a box. One disadvantage I see to this program is if you want to display heading and course at the same time, there is no label differentiating the two different displays, like an H versus a C. So, you want both displayed at the same time, you will have to remember where you placed each and make it very clear in your own mind. So much for clarity, but the developer probably figured that most people would be using either one or the other, but not both at the same time. Okay, so one last thing about heading versus course, and we'll move on. In this screenshot, I was stopped at a red light. Course in the upper left-hand corner, while heading is in the lower left-hand corner. Note the 74-degree difference between a reading of 316 versus a reading of 242. Again, the 242 is extremely accurate. That road truly does face west-southwest when you're driving down it. And even the rotational compass shows the vehicle to be traveling left of west before I came to a stop at the light. To sum up the compasses, I recommend using course indication while moving, especially in a car, and to use heading indication when using the app while standing in one place and you wish to show change in direction while, say, panning in a circle. Just a thought. The next instrument is roll and pitch graphic. So in this instrument, they use an icon of an aircraft with a few hash marks above and below, and 2 level indicator hash marks at the 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock positions on the gauge circle. This is very reminiscent of a crude aircraft attitude indicator, but gets the basic job done for land use. Roll is the left to right tilt of the vehicle, also known in aviation as bank angle, while pitch is the up to down vertical angle known as pitch angle. In my honest opinion, the developer got the direction of the movement backwards, and each change should have moved the graphic in the opposite direction, but we're not going to be overly picky on this one. I've never actually used this one before, and unless I was rock crawling in an off-road vehicle, I see little practical use for it. However, it's nice to know it's there if you want it. The next gauge is called the G-force graphic, and this one is probably the most abstract qualitative one, but pretty simple to interpret. It's impossible to quantify G-force in exact numbers looking at this bullseye styled gauge, but once you know how to read it, it's easy. G-force is the force acting on the vehicle in motion due to acceleration, deceleration, turning left or turning right. The blue square starts in the middle of the bullseye to indicate that no force is being applied to the vehicle at all. I guess we could call that a force of 1g, only gravity is acting upon the object while it's at rest. We're assuming that the vehicle is pointing forward up toward 12 o'clock. If you're accelerating, the square will move down toward the 6 o'clock position. The harder the acceleration, the more to the outside of the circle the square will move. If you are decelerating, the square will move up toward the 12 o'clock position. The harder the deceleration, the more to the outside of the circle the square will move. If you are turning left, centrifugal force points toward the outside and in the opposite direction of the turn, so the square will move to the right or the 3 o'clock position. The sharper and harder the turn, the more to the outside the circle the square will move. If you're turning right, the square will move to the left or the 9 o'clock position. The sharper and harder the turn, the more to the outside of the circle the square will move. The next display is a one-line date in a box. In this example, January 6th, 2021 is displayed in descending units of time, year, month, date, in YYYY-MMDD format. This has become an international standard as well as a computer standard that helps to avoid confusion. The next one is time. This is one-line time in a box indicated in 24-hour time. Since this app is from Europe, 24-hour time is the standard, and again, helps avoid confusion with AM and PM. With the lead zeros, I know it looks a lot like a stopwatch function. I just so happen to take this screenshot at 45 minutes after midnight, and double lead zeros are the standard indicator for 12 midnight. The next one is a rather fun one if you plan on doing mountain travel, as it is surprisingly accurate for a consumer-grade smartphone app. It's altitude. There's no gauge on this one, it's simply a digital indicator in a box, but near as I can tell it is accurate to within plus or minus 5 feet once the sensor settles down and picks a number. It always measures altitude above sea level and cannot be zeroed out at any other elevation. It can be set to feet or meters, whichever you prefer. Unlike speed and direction, altitude is tied into the cell phone's ability to calculate altitude based on latitude and longitude, basically location, so you don't have to be in motion to get an accurate reading. This is a great screenshot displaying the accuracy of the altimeter. The summit sign here at the Altamont Pass reads 1,009 feet, and the altimeter in the app was only off 2 feet at 1,011. I can live with that. The next function is distance, and like a trip odometer, it simply measures distance traveled from a given starting point. It can be set for either miles, down here kilometers in the example, and carries out to one place to the right of the decimal point. One nice feature is you can start it out at any integer you choose, not just 0. If you want to pace forward from a certain number, it can be done. For example, if you wish to match the odometer mileage of your car, you can do it. However, for most people starting a trip, there's no doubt that starting at 0 makes the most sense. The other nice feature is if you divide your journey up into 2 separate recordings, the distance meter won't automatically reset to 0, causing you to lose your already accomplished progress distance. It will continue as is, though if you'd like to clear the distance at the start of a new recording, you can certainly do that. The next function is duration, which is displayed in hours, minutes, seconds, with the HMS initials displayed so that the elapsed time of trip is not confused with time of day. Unfortunately, I don't use this too often, but the few times I've messed around with it, I've found this function to be the least user-friendly, as there is very little way to control it. There is no stop, start, reset button for it. In fact, it doesn't even sync with the start-stop of video recording. It simply starts counting forward from the time you open the app, even if you haven't begun recording yet, and it doesn't stop until you close the app. Not very useful in my opinion. Mr. Neubauer, I think he needs to do something about that. The next function is date time in a single line. Rather than adding the time by itself and the date by itself separately, the developer offers the option of presenting them together in one function. Makes a lot of sense. The date and time formats remain the same, and the date always comes before the time. There's no way to switch their order. The next function is the same, but on 2 separate lines, date above time. This is maybe better if you want each to stand out separately, but it takes more space vertically, which I personally try to avoid. This is position 1 line. It is simply latitude and longitude of the cell phone as you move. Note that if you care about privacy and plan to put your videos on social media, you may want to leave this one turned off. That's up to you. Latitude always comes before longitude, which is a geography standard amongst scientists. They do use north and south for latitude and west and east for longitude, instead of the more scientific positive and negative. If you want latitude and longitude on separate lines, with latitude on the top and longitude on the bottom, that can be done with position 2 line. Now that we're done with the add instrument plus sign icon, we can now move down to the gears icon, which is our settings. Here we can change a few things and reset others. At the top, we can change our units from metric to imperial. We have our choice of kilometers an hour, miles per hour, or knots. This will also change the altitude from feet to meters, and the distance down below here, in my example, from miles to kilometers accordingly. The next is reset start time. It will reset it to 0, but again, it will start counting forward again without your being able to control it, whether you're actually recording or not. So again, I don't consider that very useful in my opinion. Reset instrument positions deletes the non-default instruments, inserts the default ones, and moves them all to default positions on the screen with the default sizes. If you already have the instruments you want with the exact sizes and locations you desire, I strongly advise you leave this button alone. The next is overall distance, and this is where I mentioned that you can reset the distance counter to any number you like. 0 usually makes the most sense unless you are preserving your distance reading between recordings. Record audio, pretty self-explanatory. You can toggle the button either on to the right or off to the left. I like to narrate my trip, so I leave this on. Display device information shows the behind the curtain items, such as frames per second, megabytes left, battery charge left, etc., etc. These are background items specific to the workings of the app itself and have nothing to do with the movement data. Therefore, I usually prefer to leave this toggle button in the off position to the left. And finally, the most fun thing of all, the last setting is hue control. This is the fun part where you get to select the color of your gauges. It defaults at red, but as you can see, I prefer something a little mellower, like blue. The final icon is the question mark icon, and this displays the help screen, a mini owner's manual of sorts which shows a basic diagram of all the things we went over. Just a quick reference guide if you need a reminder on how to set things up. So that concludes everything about the app, how to run it, how to set it up. Next we'll look at the app in action with myself doing some driving samples. This was taken 3 years ago in 2018 when I first got the app. As you can see, the default non-paid version of the app looks a tad different. For one, you can clearly see the watermark that was in the lower left-hand corner. It blinked, making it furtherly annoying in an attempt to encourage purchase. I'm in no way implying that the developer doesn't deserve compensation for his efforts, just you need to be aware of that ahead of time. I forget what it cost and I can't see it on my screen since I've already purchased it, but I seem to recall it was around $4.99. The color was default red and couldn't be changed. The size of the instruments were set and couldn't be changed. The compass was only available in magnetic heading and without the compass disc in digital degrees only. The recording limit was 3 minutes when I recorded my first video here. Please excuse the shaking of the camera in my hand as I show you a short view of my first video. I hadn't bought my windshield suction cup yet. So I'm getting myself set up. Let's bring the volume up just a bit. Driving my old car, I don't own that anymore. I'm up in Coulterville, California. Just a few hours before it started pouring rain. Highway 49 was closed, so I wind up making a U-turn and getting out of here. This is way too dangerous. So I'll come up over here. Got a couple barking dogs. You'll hear them. There we go. I'm invading their space, I guess. They didn't like that too much. And I'm heading back out of town. Back down we go. And there we go. Headed back toward LaGrange, Waterford, and Modesto. Now, I was shocked to learn that I only got 3 minutes of recording time. So, here was my second recording that same evening. And the only difference was I was going a little bit faster. So I was going a little bit faster. Few mountain winding roads in the foothills. Having fun, driving my classic car and using and testing this new video app. So that was wonderful, and we'll move on from there. 6 months later, I shot this video with the paid version. Now I was able to shoot for longer than 3 minutes. In fact, as long as I wanted, barring the exception of limitations to phone space and battery power. Here I had the course compass, the gauges, the size and positions I wanted, and I could change the color to blue. I had since gotten the video suction cup. You can kind of see it down here for the windshield, but as you can see, it wasn't locked correctly and still shook. But that's a story for another video. Oh, night driving. Almost forgot about that. Shot 9:30 at night. This gives you a pretty good idea of how the app handles low light situations. It's decent. It's not spectacular. Though to be fair, low light quality has more to do with the iPhone than the app. Here I was using an iPhone 6S, not my current iPhone 11, so that may have explained part of it. Anyway, let's have a look. I was in Riverbank, California on the night of October 17th, 2018. And we'll move a little bit further. Dark two-lane road section. Headlights are bright enough. Under the street lights, it lights the ground decently. We'll get more up towards the center of town. If I can find it. Here we go. I'm making a turn. And near the center of town, it does pick up, light, ambient light, or where there's overhead light decently. Tail lights and headlights show up clearly. Not bad at all. We now move up to March of last year in the first video with the iPhone 11. The 11 has different dimensions than previous iPhones. Note how that affects the screen resolution of this app. The older videos filled the screen, while this one stretches the screen wide and creates black borders top and bottom. The ability to choose screen ratios and resolutions is something that maybe the developer will include in future versions, but for now, we have to deal with the images looking slightly fat and distorted from left to right. However, I will say the image is clear and the horizontal field of view appears to be a bit more generous. And I'll let you have a good look. Okay, so as I start, that car does look a little bit, shall we say, hefty in the rear end. 35 mile an hour sign looks a little wider. That pickup truck, that garbage can looks kind of fat. So on and so forth. See what I mean? And yeah, it looks a little wonky. I don't think the image, those structures are really this wide, but again, something we live with. I like the clarity. The clarity is really nice. Next, we'll move on to August 29th. And I decided to take a little drive on a clear but hazy hot day. High visibilities and dry conditions are perfect for these winding roads. Let me get to a part where you can see that. Here we go. I personally wouldn't want to have to drive them at night in the rain or the fog in the wintertime. But this time of the year, these are a lot of fun. And of course, the piece of video I'm sampling, they look awfully straight. Trust me, there were some winding parts. Here we go. Let me just back up a little bit. There we go. Coming up to a narrow bridge. Did I? No, I missed the bridge. Nice tree-lined two-lane roads. Like I said, this is a lot of fun. I enjoy driving the car and taking trips, and I also enjoy using this camera to review the data and see what I have and how many miles I traveled and what have you. So that's a good one there. 2 days later, and this is just outside of Placerville, California, in the Sierra foothills, another great opportunity to use the altimeter. Up at 2,000 feet, you can see how the altimeter isn't exactly precision and skips numbers as it moves, but once it settles on a reading, it's pretty accurate. 2002, 1999. You'll notice it skips a lot of numbers, but it's dropping faster than it can recover. I believe it takes a second. It re-registers in 1 second impulses. If the decline is slow enough, it'll go through each number, kind of like the speedometer. But if it's too rapid, it'll skip numbers on the way up or down. Not particularly a problem, just something I noticed. So to summarize the video and offer pros and cons on the app, the pros are 1, its ease of use, 2, the number of instruments available, 3, it's amazing all the data the app can provide, and 4, the clear image and the wide field of view. The cons: 1, it does not integrate with the default video camera and cannot use any of those settings. We can't change lighting, we can't change focus, exposure, any of the things we could do with iPhone's internal camera. We cannot adjust resolution or frame rate. It distorts the image with an odd size of 1500 by 720 on iPhone 11. And number 4, duration does not start with the video and cannot be stopped. That's maybe something that Christian Neubauer will work on his next update. Well, that wraps up this in-depth review of Christian Neubauer's GPS Speedometer app. If you wind up using it, I'd be curious what you think, and you can leave your thoughts in the comments section. I'd also highly suggest that you rate it and leave some comments for the developers so he knows what people want in future versions. I'm B3Burner saying so long for now.